Good morning and welcome to Cheche, the show where opinion counts, live on Citizen TV. I'm your host, Udwaka Mimo. Kenya is hosting a meeting of the European Union and African, Caribbean and Pacific countries here in Nairobi. Their agenda is broadly focused on trade and development. Kenya and the EU, for instance, will sign a funding deal that gives the country more than 50 billion shillings over the next 7 years. The EU is Africa's largest trading partner, but it is also supporting regional counter-terrorism efforts, which I'm sure we'll all welcome given the bloody start to the week. And so our guests today are the Cabinet Secretary for Foreign Affairs, Amina Mohammed, and the EU Ambassador to Kenya, Ludwig Brie. Wetegi Njau of Royal Media Services and David McCarley are in the studio as the Cheche panel. Good morning and welcome to Cheche. Ms. Mohammed, I'll start with you because, you know, I've referenced the bloody start to the week. We've heard a lot about travel advisories. So in your capacity as Cabinet Secretary for Foreign Affairs, how were you able to convince all these foreign dignitaries to come in to Kenya, given tourists being pulled out of the country?
Well, first of all, by the time we started preparing for the two meetings, the SCP Council of Ministers meeting and the SCP EU Council of Ministers meeting, we did not have the travel advisories in place. That's the first thing. The second thing is that the travel advisories that were issued did not affect Nairobi. They affected very specific parts of the coast. For instance, they did not affect Diani until just the other day. They did not affect Lamu and other Malindi. They affected parts of Mombasa, the island. So that was not in the picture by then. But I think what's really encouraging is that despite the travel advisories, right, there was enough goodwill and confidence in the country that all these dignitaries came. At the moment, we have almost 46 ministers here. We have deputy ministers. We have ambassadors from Brussels. So we have a really full house. If you came to KICC, you'd actually be surprised. So it just shows that there is a lot of confidence in the country. We're also very grateful, of course, from this, for the support that we got from Ambassador Briet and the EU. Which de-emphasized the travel advisories and emphasized the importance of having the council meetings in Nairobi. Okay,
Ambassador Brie, you're agreeing with the Cabinet Secretary. In terms of security then, what exactly is the EU doing to support Kenya and the wider East African region's efforts?
I could speak in two different ways. One, EU, including the member states, or just the European Union through the European Commission, the European Community. We are doing quite a bit, actually. I'd like to start just by picking up what Amina Mohammed said, and that is that travel advisories for Nairobi haven't changed in the last 14 months. It's very difficult for ambassadors. This is really something for the European Union member state ambassadors, because they have an obligation to look after their nationals in the host country to which they are accredited. So they always face that difficult balance, and therefore it's quite important that there's good dialogue between the governments on the one hand and these ambassadors on the other. I can exclude myself from that because we look after our own staff, and that is already a preoccupation, but not necessarily after the various nationals of the EU member states. A good dialogue to make sure that there's an understanding of what is being done and what is being addressed. And this is, I think it's important to talk briefly about the drama that has taken place this week, not least to express our condolences to the families, but also to say that we stand firmly with the government of Kenya in trying to address these issues. What are we doing specifically? We are trying to set up a regional center to make sure there are not more small arms circulating in the region. We are trying a lot to counter radicalize, to counter violent extremism. And we do that in close coordination with the Supreme Council of Muslims in Kenya, with the Interreligious Council and other groups, reaching out to the communities. And let's be very clear, this cannot be only a task for the government or, quote, security forces. It is too easy, and I find it cheap, to simply condemn the government on this. There's also a task for communities, for all of us.
So where does sharing of intelligence come in? Because a lot of the anger directed at Western governments has to do with travel advisories or evacuations followed, within a day or two or three, if you want to go that far, by an attack. Do you have any role to play in the sharing of intelligence?
The member states do, yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
We are much more limited in that respect as EU delegation. But if I look at the United Kingdom, the French, the Germans, others, they have a role to play. I must just address what is said in Corridors of Power today in the paper, and that is that we are not willing to share intelligence because of Kenya's relationship with China. Blatant nonsense. I mean, let's be clear. I cannot be more outspoken than that.
Okay. Cabinet Secretary, you want to come
that's
in?
actually unfair, honestly. Really, it's very, very unfair.
Why is it unfair?
To say that there is no sharing of information because of Kenya's relationship with China. Two reasons. One is that we actually share information, right? All of us. And I have had the ambassadors of the different countries come in and talk to us about issues, but there's never any really specific information, okay? It's just general information that is gathered from multiple sources, right? So between the time that you actually get the intelligence and the time it takes to put it together, right, and try and pinpoint where attacks are going to take place, right? It takes time. It takes time. But also the fact that these attacks occur not just in developing countries, there are in developed countries as well that have more sophisticated intelligence systems, right? Tells you that sometimes there's unpredictability. Right, in the information that you receive, sometimes you really know you don't know when it's going to take place, right? But apart from all that, security is not the business of any one part of our country, any one organ of our system. Security is the business of each and every one of us. We see things, we hear things, we note things, we know who is not from our communities, we know who has just come in, we know who is a stranger, and I think that the sooner we begin to notice these things and share information quickly, right, the better it will be for all of us. The countries that have been able to deal with terrorism are the countries where the communities, the individuals, right, have been able to share information quickly, to alert authorities quickly. And it's true that our systems are not yet perfect.
The United Kingdom closed the Mombasa consulate, which means they knew, and in fact they have said they knew this thing will happen, and the Americans also knew, and but we did nothing.
No, the truth is this. Oh no! Immediately that consulate was closed, security agencies poured into the cost. They poured into the cost. But another thing is this: a consulate, an honorary consulate, or a general consulate. It's there to serve the nationals of that country. Okay, we have some. We have one in LA. We have one in Dubai. It's there not to deal with even the relationship between countries. It's there to provide consular services to its own nationals. If you have evacuated your nationals, honestly, right?
There's no need for a consulate.
There you go. So basically, there are so many reasons why the consulate was closed, and sometimes, I just wonder at all the speculation. Because if you don't have, look, we have honorary consulates in many places in the world. Most of them really provide that kind of service, right? They visas, they renew passports, they support like civil marriages and all that, right? They allow those to take place in the consulates. But if you don't have nationals there, right, the work of the consulate then is really limited. Okay, and yet you're spending a lot of money on the consulate. So I'm not saying that that's the only reason they closed it. Maybe it's true that the threats were real, but also that factor that they're there to serve their nationals, but they had evacuated many of them, and therefore the need to have the consulate was diminished.
Cabinet Secretary, I'll pick you up on something you said as you responded to Mutegi, that as soon as the UK closed its consulate in Mombasa, that the security agencies are on top of this and poured in reinforcements. Yet we know, in the case of Mpeketoni, that the attacks carried on for hours. So anyone listening to you will find a dissonance between security agencies pouring in and an attack going on for hours with no reinforcements being sent in.
I don't want to comment on Peketoni because investigations are ongoing. We all want to know what happened.
Yes, your cabinet colleague is on the ground.
We all want to know what happened. Something went atrociously wrong. What is it that went so wrong that this could happen, take so long, right? And yet, nobody came to the assistance of our compatriots, So we need to find out. And right now, really, let's not second guess them. Let's not speculate. Let's allow them the time. The other day when we had the meeting in the ministry with the press, we were talking about the pilot in South Sudan, for instance, right? And the issue was raised. And I said, listen, we're really working on it. Give us just a little time. We have already secured his release. We're just trying to find ways of bringing him out safely, right? Because it's a very dangerous place that he's being held in, right? It's right in the middle of jungle. Right? And there are many militia groups that are just, marauding and, moving around there. So please allow us, give us time. We will let you know in the shortest time period, maybe in 2 days, right? Yesterday, we were able to get him out, okay? So yesterday, he was with our ambassador in South Sudan, who was taking him to the hospital, have him have checkups. I spoke to him. He was very happy to be out. He spoke to his family, So sometimes you need to give a little bit of time so that these things can be worked out. At the end of the day, you will get the information. The information will be made available.
Ambassador?
No, just to say one on the consulate. It's a one-person consulate. So let's not over-dramatize this. There's a fair amount of visibility for that one person. So the decision is really an ad hoc decision, and it will be reversed once the situation calms down. On security in Peketoni, we all want to live in communities that are safe. You cannot protect every single village in your country. It doesn't matter whether you are, in a rural area in Europe or whether you are here in Kenya. So these attacks are particularly difficult to prevent and control in a matter of minutes, as we would all want. You do not want, and you remember that the gun lobby in the United States said we need armed guards in schools. Heaven forbid. Where's life? Where's the normalcy? Where do we put our common sense sort of measure? And I think, therefore, we need to reflect how more broadly to address the situation, and there are root causes there, and as said, I think it's these root causes that need to be addressed.
David, you look like you're chewing over.
I hope it's about the SCP.
We're going to come back to the SCP
shortly, but now that let's get out of Peketoni. The president of the government has spoken and explained what it thinks about that attack in Peketoni. Are you in agreement as EU? Do you agree with the president's statement?
I have two comments on that. The first one is a formal one, and it's not us to disagree with the president of a host country. The second one is, yes, we are in agreement with the president. There may well be a combination of elements there, and as the cabinet secretary just said, give it a moment before we start reacting. So rather than playing things up in the press, and if I may talk about that for just 1 second.
Please do.
I really feel that the incendiary statements that have been made, particularly by the opposition in Kenya, should stop. Now, this is not for me, as an outside diplomat looking into Kenya, to say, but to declare a public holiday, to say the national dialogue must succeed or there will be consequences, to essentially, hold things hostage to a process, that's not helpful. To intimate that administrations should change, as has happened in other countries, and I've heard it, I've seen it, I think is very unhelpful in a country, in any country, in a country that is dealing, with stabilization processes and all. And I'm sorry, it's a political statement. It is in a way interfering in a domestic process, but I truly believe that we need to de-escalate the political rhetoric that we are seeing in Kenya today.
Right.
Thank you. You want to say something before we
No,
move
I
on?
I think that, you know, it's always good to put things in perspective, and it's always good to learn from best practice, okay? Take the United States, for instance. It's the best example of a democracy, right? It's supposed to be the, you know, most advanced and vibrant democracy in the world. Mitt Romney lost the elections, right? What would happen in the U.S. if you had the same things that are happening here? That you went around the country, right, and had rallies, and I have a lot of respect for my former Prime Minister, a lot of respect. I worked with him, you know. But what would happen? Look at other countries. You know, you are the press. You are the ones who actually help formulate opinion in the country, right? So when you're looking at the situation in Kenya, look at we don't live in isolation. We don't live in space. We live here on Earth. And other countries have elections, right? And systems are put in place. And people allow the space to carry out their mandates for the term that they are elected. You know, the president of South Africa was just elected. We went for his inauguration, you know. I do not believe that 1 year down the line, yeah, you would have what we have in this country. Why are we so unique? That is a question we must start asking ourselves.
Okay.
What is so different in this country? Every country that considers itself a democracy holds elections and has a period of time during which an incumbent is allowed to carry out his mandate, my brothers and sisters, right? So that's what we need to find out. What is so unique with us that we look at ourselves so differently, and we want to be in heightened political discourse throughout, and yet our first priority has to be to create jobs, right? To generate sustainable incomes for our people, to develop our country, right? To come together to forge unity so that nobody can tear us apart. You know, that's what that should be our first priority. Excellent. And you have to help us do that.
Right. I'll close the discussion on that. Mutegi, you want to say something, but the Cabinet Secretary has to leave us shortly. So we'll move the discussion along to you know, the ACP meeting. Unless it's burning. Okay. Great. So we have these two meetings that you're hosting. The EU and African, Caribbean, Pacific nations, as well as the African, Caribbean, and Pacific nations on their own. Beginning with the African, Caribbean, and Pacific nations on their own, what are you trying to achieve from this, I think it's the 38th meeting?
Well, this is the 99th meeting.
And then the other one's the 38th.
39th.
Oh, 39th, okay. So what are you trying to achieve?
Well, actually, you know, this it's the 99th meeting, right? And at each of these meetings, right, we get together, we discuss a specific set of issues. Yeah? We agree on a way forward on these issues. We discuss our relationship amongst ourselves, but our relationship also with the EU. This is an old, very, very solid, very supportive, very beneficial relationship between the SCP countries and the EU. You know, as you know, we have non-reciprocal access, right, into the EU market. 60% of the exports of the SCP countries actually end up, in the markets, in the stalls, in the EU. Which is not much if you consider that it's only 5% of what the EU imports, right? But for the countries of the SCP, that's a huge chunk of their exports, 60% going to the EU market. So even that argument about China, you know, it loses a lot of ground when you start looking at these details, all right? So what we're trying to do now is we're looking at this and saying, okay, if 60% of our trade goes into the EU market,
sorry,
right?
I need to stop you. The argument about China, what do you mean?
Well, 60% of our exports go into the EU market.
Yes.
So the EU is actually a bigger,
trade partner than China. Okay.
Yes,
that's what
trade
you're
partner. You know, but look, 60% of our exports and 5% of the imports of the EU. So there's something wrong there. We need to review that, and we're doing that through the EPAs to make sure that we're not. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Economic partnership agreements.
Yes. We're doing that through the economic partnership agreements because what we want to do is to move this to the next phase where we're not only exporting raw material, but we are exporting value added, right? So that the 95% that the EU is getting from other countries outside the SCP, right, can increase. Can reduce, rather.
Okay, let me stop you there, just because it's becoming quite technical, and for our audiences that aren't familiar with these, the economic partnerships, economic partnership agreements have been on the table for a couple of years. There's been no conclusion. These, what came into, were put on the table, back in 2007, once the Lomé Convention expired, we had the Cotonou Agreement come in to transition us from the Lomé Convention to the EPAs.
There you go.
Yeah? So what is the problem? Why are you on the 99th meeting and still we have no conclusive framework for our trade with the EU?
Well, we're almost there. First of all, the Cotonou Agreement is in place, right, until 2020.
Right.
It exists until 2020. The EPAs, we hope, will come into force by October of this year. Okay. We plan to have a meeting. We'll have an informal meeting here now, when the EU ministers come in, but we intend to have a formal meeting in July to close the deal. I think we're very, very close. There are only a few outstanding issues.
Such as?
Well, one is export taxes, right? That's one.
Is this for the entire ACP region, Kenya?
No, we are negotiating as separate economic entities, right? So we are negotiating as the East African community. And so any negotiation does not take into account only Kenya's concerns. It takes into account everybody's, the 5 countries of the East African community. And that we have come so far to a place now where we have only very, very minor issues to deal with. And I'm totally convinced, and I think the ambassador will also agree, that by July we should be able to close this deal.
They have been opposed by civil society organizations. They have been having problems. With a lot of people say, don't sign them. Why?
Don't sign the EPAs. Yeah. Well, if we don't sign the EPAs, then we won't have any arrangement in place between the European Union and the EAC.
Why are they being opposed?
Why are they being opposed? Well, they're being opposed because I think there's, there's always this suspicion that it will be lopsided, it will be skewed, it will be only in favor of the EU countries.
But they're written. We know what's said there.
Yes.
Why?
Well, we don't agree. We don't agree fully, and that's why there are 3 outstanding issues, because those are the areas where we think that if we don't complete the negotiations, that we may get a road deal.
What are those 3?
Well, export, like I was saying, export taxes.
Which means
right?
what?
Which means basically that when we are exporting and maybe raw materials, skins and hides, for instance, right, into Europe, because we are exporting them in the raw form, we impose a tax on them as a country, right? It is the space that we need. Right? It's an instrument, actually, that the taxman uses to create revenue for the country. Okay, we've had this for a very long time. We don't intend to remove it. We are talking to the EU, and the ambassador is going to jump in because he's much more of a technical man on this than I am.
But this is also your background, though, isn't it?
That's your background. What are the other 2?
The second one is on the Cotonou, linking the Cotonou to the EPAs. Now, the Cotonou Agreement has provisions on governance, on human rights, on including provisions on chemicals of weapons of mass destruction and all that. Now, we are both parties to all the instruments that exist in the world on all those issues, and we don't feel that it's necessary to include them in a trade arrangement, okay? Because the fear is, and Ambassador, I'm sorry to say this, but the fear is that this can be used, right, to block exports. Okay, at certain times. It's quite easy, and it can be quite subjective to say, well, you're not observing these provisions of this instrument, and therefore we're going to come together and lock you out, So we don't want that. We don't want to be put in a situation where, I don't say that it's going to happen. It has never happened with us. I don't see it happening, but in any case, that
taking the precaution.
Yeah.
What's the third issue?
Hanging. What is the third issue?
Agricultural subsidies.
Agricultural subsidies in the EU, right? Because of course they provide a lot of subsidies to their farmers, and we are saying, don't do that.
Because our farmers can't compete.
Because it creates an imbalance, right?
Because I agree with everything the Cabinet Secretary has said, but Motegi, non-signature of an economic partnership agreement would deny to the 5 countries of the East African community the legal certainty of continued duty-free, quota-free export on all products to the European Union. 28 member states plus free trade agreement with Turkey on the side. That is something that is quite important. No other trading partner is offering other trading blocs or African countries duty-free, quota-free access for all products. Now, there are issues, as the Cabinet Secretary mentions, which deal with the question how much policy space should Kenyan, East African community governments have. And I'm quite sensitive, and have been when I was posted to South Africa for the Southern African Development Community as well. It's quite important. We've now accepted that. No consultation, just notification. Doesn't mean that there shouldn't be a process. Any existing export tax is grandfathered. New export taxes can be introduced, be it for major currency fluctuation issues, be it for more narrow issues such as the establishment of a domestic industry or protection of the environment, things like that. So it's essentially open. But the question remains how much space is left. Now you can argue, as actually my trade commissioner does, that in an increasingly globalized world, and there I'm getting more in your area of expertise, Cabinet Secretary, the imposition of an export tax may not make much sense anymore. And the question is Kenya going to be able, or East African community countries, to add sufficient value to their chain with something which we very much encourage? Be very clear about that.
Which we are going to do together.
To work on this area. So, and that means also that we should supply know-how and expertise to help. And we need, for example, also to make sure that where there are still obstacles to enter the European market, that we can overcome those. One objective of the EPAs is also regional, and that is to promote regional trade and do away with non-tariff barriers, which is one of the reasons why we have supported what President Kenyatta has been saying actually from the beginning of the day that he took office, visiting Mombasa, speeding up.
But isn't the case that civil society objections have to deal with the imbalances in the global trading system, but also the imbalances in our playing fields? And so, for instance, because these EPAs are meant to comply with WTO rules of reciprocity and things like that, if we say, for instance, that we reciprocate when it comes to equal access to markets, most of the ACP countries will be at a significant disadvantage compared to EU countries because their markets are much more advanced.
Well, and I think one answer to that is you're not reciprocating fully. Today, the East African market is open for 65% of all the tariff lines for all products.
Yes.
East Africa, we will open our market as European Union immediately upon the entry into force of an economic partnership.
So what you're telling us in short is that there'll be a staggered...
Yes, and it is over 20 years that the East African community will open an additional 18%. The remaining 17%, 65, 18, 17 equals 100 for ease of talking, will remain protected because we've accepted a long time ago with the East African community member states that those are sensitive products.
Okay. Cabinet Secretary, the ambassador refers to the East African market, but Kenya to some extent is at a disadvantage because of its growth. Because when we talk about the 5 East African community countries, they are least developed countries. We are not. We are a developing country. So to what extent does any signature, does any agreement made in July cater for the differences in the economic growth of the East African countries?
You see, they had actually better access to all markets.
And they're protected whichever way.
Than we had. It? Yes, but again, even within the East African community, right, our market is open to them. Right? Theirs is not fully open to us. But we accept that because we all want to grow together, okay? And we also export more to them than they do to us, right? So we accept to pay, right, the taxes that they impose on our products going in. But we've been able to work, right, on formulas that work for us, even within the negotiations. What's interesting is that at the negotiations, we've all spoken, in the same manner, in the same way. And the reason why we've not been able to clinch this deal is not because we have been terribly hesitant, but it's because we wanted to make sure that everybody was on board and everybody agreed with us and everybody was ready, right, to embrace this, the economic partnership agreement. So we have methods in which we work on that. After all, within the European Union itself, there are some bigger economic powers than others, and they don't all enjoy, the same concessions and accesses into each other's, markets. So, if you're a big economy, for purposes of equity, but also for purposes of supporting your own private sector, which is accessing these markets, you accept to pay taxes on some of the...
You assume the big brother role. Okay. Yes, Mutegi.
I wanted to ask the reason for including governance issues in trade agreement. What's the justification? We don't do that among European countries. If Portugal, for instance, collapses and there's corruption there, you don't ask them. Why do you want to ask us?
Mutegi, I knew you were going to ask, but later on you're going to say something about soccer as well. One reason I'm not wearing orange today is that orange has different connotations here, but it's not a more important day. No, listen, governance issues, and I think the Deputy President at an earlier meeting was quite clear about it. Governance issues, we should not put in a trade agreement issues that do not belong in a trade agreement. That's Kenya's line, yeah, in the EAC line. We have largely accepted that. When I say largely, I need to make clear that the European Parliament is still quite keen to see a link between the sort of sanction articles in the Cotonou Convention, Articles 96 and 97, to the Economic Partnership Agreement. The language that we have now on the table, and that is before the East African Community and not yet accepted, actually does not make that link explicitly anymore.
Okay.
But it is still a politically highly debatable issue. And even within our ranks, I can tell you there is disagreement.
Right, we have to take a break now, so do stay with us here in Cheche. Our guests this morning are the Cabinet Secretary for Foreign Affairs, Amina Mohammed, and the EU Ambassador to Kenya, Ludwig Brie. When we come back, we'll carry on our discussion about the trade and development agreements that hopefully will be agreed. I'm not sure if we're going to agree them or lay the foundation for them. Our SMS number is 22422 and our Twitter handle is @Cheche_TV.